students in EDU 303. We're going to use this presentation as our class for Thursday, September 5th. And I'm going to review Ahola chapters 1 through 6. Even though we've talked about them, this is a PowerPoint that I created, I guess, last semester. And it has some information that even though you've heard it, will help you hear it again. So we've already talked about the differences between watching and observing. We know that when we are watching, we're oftentimes not really paying attention. So we want to be more mindful of observing while we're in our field experience. And that means that we are truly focusing in on what we are trying to determine. So we want to try not to be in a hurry. We don't want to put in our biases or our opinions, and we want to simply write what we see, what we hear, and what we feel as far as temperature, wind, and our surroundings, but not our feelings. There are many reasons why we observe. One of them is because it helps us to understand who the child is. Each child has his or her own temperament, their own motivations, fears, likes, etc. And it's important for us to become familiar with the child as a whole child. Another reason is because it helps us develop a relationship with the child. If you consider the people in your life that you trust the most, very likely they're the people who know you and your individual needs. They understand why you do what you do, and your relationships, your best relationships, are built on trust. And children come to trust when the individuals in their lives help meet their needs. And so we want to make sure that you build a healthy relationship with your child so that you can earn that child's trust and respect. Another reason that we observe is to help prepare and plan for the child's needs. Maria Montessori talks about how children go through sensitive periods, which are times when children are more apt to learn something new than at a later date or an earlier time. And so in order to know when a child is in a sensitive period, maybe they're ready to learn to tie their shoes, or they're ready to say the sounds of the alphabet, we have to carefully observe the child and look for those signs that tell us the child is ready. Even though theories can tell us when a child is supposed to be ready, we know that each child is developing on his or her own timetable. Development is predictable as far as the sequence and the order, but it is flexible as far as the timing goes. Some children walk around 12 months, some as early as 8 months old, and some as late as 15 months old. And we know that the signs of what to look for, so that when we are teaching, we can find the most opportune moments when that child is ready to learn. Another reason we observe is to alert us to a child's special needs. So working with children requires a basic knowledge of knowing when there's a disability or a delay in development. And only through careful observation can we distinguish what's developmentally appropriate and what is something to be concerned about. One of the activities that I want you to help me with on this presentation is figuring out what it means to be objective and subjective. And we did this in class a little bit. I don't really like the way that the title on the slide says objective, and then the first bullet says subjective. So let's look at the first bullet. Subjective is your feelings, your assumptions, your beliefs, what you think. So if you look at this picture of the little girl and the little boy, what do you think What do you believe might be happening in this picture? So take a minute and maybe jot down a subjective statement. If I was to write down something subjective, I might say that the little boy is upset because the young girl will not share the materials. Now, that's subjective because I'm putting an emotion onto the boy. I'm saying that he's upset when I really don't know. So I might say things instead to be more objective, that the young boy was watching the girl play and asked her numerous times if he could play too, and she did not respond. So I'm only going to write what I saw, what I heard. We want to delay trying to figure out or trying to interpret what we think is going on until after we've made our observations. So that will come in your reflection. But we've already practiced with this picture, so I want to go to this one. And this is where I'm going to assign you a task. So now I want you to try. Here we see a picture, and I want you to write your initial subjective interpretation. And then I want you to write it as objectively as possible. Write an objective statement, and I want you to email me those two statements. Just pause the video, pull up my email, send me those two statements. You don't have to put Dear Dr. Stockdale. You don't need to put a closing signature. I'll know who it's from. Just give me those two statements and you will have completed the task. Okay? Moving along, and then we'll discuss our emails when we get back together in class next Tuesday. In your Ahola text on page 6, Ahola takes us through what you need to do a systematic observation. We've already talked about this, but here it goes again. You're gonna identify what you want to collect. So you're gonna have a focus. Maybe it's fine motor skills, but you're going to take all of your developmental domains with you in your binder. You're going to decide what method you're going to use. Are you going to do an anecdotal record after you finish observing? Are you going to do a running record during the observation? You're going to have your organization system set up. There's a typo in this slide. You're going to create an organization system with a binder, dividers, and acetate sheets. You also might put some folders in there. Decide what works for you. And then create a schedule for your observation. You need to be very mindful of the family's schedule. And if you're going to give your schedule to the parent or parents, and follow that observation schedule. If something comes up, make sure you email or call to cancel. Okay? Remember that confidentiality is key, that you need to express that to the parents. It's also in our consent form, which you need signed before you begin. Use pseudonyms or initials in your reports and when you're talking about the student. And for this, because these are not exercises in class, I want you to create a pseudonym that is not silly. It's different when you're doing exercises in class. I think it kind of makes it fun to call the student Mickey Mouse or whatever when you're looking at a running record or something. But for this, we are taking a more serious tone. So I want you to use a pseudonym that sounds plausible. Okay? Respect the role of the other adults in the family. If you notice that mom is very frazzled, that the child just threw up, and everything's a mess, don't try to get your hours in. Go ahead and make your apologies and duck out of there, and respect the child. If the child falls asleep and you can't observe that child, if you can switch to something like interviewing the parent, you can do that, but otherwise it might be time for you just to get out and come back and make those hours up another time. Okay? On page 8 of Ahola, our text talks about the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And this was a law that ensures, or is a law that ensures that children with special needs receive the necessary services they need to help them reach their potential. And those services are free to the family. Originally, the law was designed for children age 5 to 18, or school-age children, and it only pertained to education. But that has changed. It now covers birth to age 5, and it has expanded to include things like physical therapy and family support. So essentially, the law says that public health agencies and local school districts will work together to identify children with special needs, design individualized programs for the child, and monitor that child. They're either going to have an IFSP, which is an individualized family service plan, or an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. The IFSP is for children from birth to 3, and an IEP is written for a child 3 to, I believe, 21. I think it goes all the way up to 21. Man, I can't believe I don't know that. But I know definitely school age. So depending on the actual plan. And it's designed, and then there's a team of people who monitor the child's progress. One of the big changes in our early childhood programs has been the shift away from play-based assessments to standardized tests, which is not developmentally appropriate, but I don't run the world. So when you go into a classroom, when you go into an early childhood classroom, and you see children sitting around a kidney-shaped table with reading books and the teacher telling them to put their pointer finger on words and read aloud with her, that's not developmentally appropriate, and I am sorry that you have to see that. You will probably see it, but our children need to be playing, which is how they learn. So once upon a time, teachers would say things like, put away your blocks and finger paint. Let's eat a graham cracker and then nap time. Now you hear more something like, put away your Kaplan primer. We are scheduled to complete the standardized test or standardized assessment. Play-based assessment is the natural way for children to show what they can do. It shows us how they feel, how they learn new things, and how they behave with familiar people. So you are working on play-based assessments in this course. That is your job. You are going to figure out ways through play to see what these children know. You might be checking their social competence, how they interact with peers and participate in group activities. You might be checking their communication skills, how they initiate conversations and express their needs and wants. You could be looking at their gross motor or fine motor development, their coordination, their balance, how they grasp writing utensils, eating utensils, and that kind of thing. Their self-help skills. Do they go to the toilet on their own? Do they feed themselves? Can they dress themselves? Can they zip and button things? And as well as their readiness for, readiness for reading, such as, you might be checking some of their pre-reading skills, but we are not going to be doing anything like testing our students, our children. We've talked in length about anecdotal records. There's more on that in Chapter 2. Here's an example of one. It does not list the beginning time and ending time, which you do need to list. We'll come back to these examples. I just want to go through this pretty briefly because I've used up a lot of time already. Just remember that the anecdotal records are a snapshot of the child's development. It's actually what you see, not your preconceived notions. It is using direct quotes. Make sure that you are describing exactly what you hear the child say. So if Kia says, looked at me, and it sounds like L-U-T, lut, or then you're going to write L-U-T in your anecdotal record, because that's going to help you evaluate the sounds she's producing. Be careful when you are labeling emotions. Again, label what you see, not what you think you see. Label what you hear, not what you think you hear. If you choose to do a running record, which is the same time while the action is happening, just know that the same rules apply, and that you're going to record minute by minute details as much as you can. I'm not going to click on this link, but we will do this in class. These are actually videos that we're going to use to give us practice writing anecdotal records and running records, and do some observing of children in different play settings. Chapter 3 is about checklists and rating scales. I definitely suggest you look through there before the chapter is assigned, because it will help you with your own checklists. This is one that just has yes, no. I'm going to ask that you also add dates to any of your checklists. Here's a rating scale. Sometimes, never, sometimes, often, always. This might be good for you to have, and either you could use it to observe as well as interview the parent. So check out some of the rating scales. And know that you are going to focus on one domain at the time, but you're going to include all of your observations. 33 through 36 are where you will find out more about rating scales. There's a really good one on social development on page 35 you might want to check out. How to create one is on pages 38 through 40. You're going to want 12 to 15 items in each of your checklists. This says 10 to 12. You want 12 to 15. I've given you the websites of where you can already find some checklists. You're just going to want to modify it to make sure it's age appropriate and developmentally appropriate for your child. You wouldn't want to use this if you are observing a 4-year-old, because 18 months is too early for that child. Structured observations, I gave you some ideas in the other presentation. It's when you are going from passive to active. When you were doing your people watching and your child watching exercises, you should have been passive. You were told not to interact. That's not the case with your structured observations. You are going to become active. You're going to get to know your child, and you're going to become part of that environment. You're going to set up situations to elicit certain behaviors, and you're going to help the child explore areas of interest. You're going to create learning environments for the child, being supportive of their health and their abilities. You want to be respectful of his or her culture, backgrounds, and individuality. You want to give positive support, and you want to challenge the child to gain new competencies. See what kind of teaching you might be able to do. So here are some examples of a few goals and objectives and a few indicators. Here's one on creative dramatic play. On page 192, there is an example of some ideas for an interview. That might be one of your structured engagements, and you would be working to identify the stage of receptive development. So, but you have a blank slate other than the one mandatory infant observation, which is object permanence and reflexes, and toddler activity, which is conservation. You've got 4 activities that you're going to develop. More on structuring the observation. Now, visual documentation. In chapter 5, you want to think about how are you going to document your work with your child. Definitely take pictures, unless the parent says not to. You're going to take pictures of this child engaged in different activities. You want to take as many pictures as you can or as you need, but you also want to think about other forms of visual documentation. For instance, here, this not only shows us the child, but it shows him sitting up and it shows him focused on the camera. But here, this child's face isn't even showing. This is an example of him engaged in a fine motor structured play activity. So you could use photographs of the child's work or accomplishments, such as this. You could do photographs of the child involved in everyday activities. You could audio record or visually record the child. Paintings, drawings, collages, scribbles, writing. You could dictate a book depending on the age of your child. And those ideas and more are on page 58. Make sure again that you obtain consent. I put the new consent form on Blackboard. If you've already printed off the one that says Coker College, you can use it. The new one says Coker University. Make sure that you identify the method you're going to use. Decide ahead of time, am I doing an anecdotal record? Am I doing a running record? Because if you're choosing to do a running record, you can't do it after the observation, right? Label your work in as far as the beginning time, ending time, setting, and date. And make sure that you have a place to put your documentation. Carry that binder with you and use it to organize your case study. When you develop your questionnaire, that's chapter 6, you want to be thinking of Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, and you want to obtain as much information about the various layers of this child's environment. That includes medical history and health history, developmental milestones, personal habits, his or her preferences, likes and dislikes, family information, right? Here are some of the things that I just mentioned. Here are some sample questions. You could learn about their daily eating, sleeping, and play habits. And make sure that you ask a variety of questions. Close-ended. How often do you read books to your child? During this past week, has your child played outside? Those are going to be short, close-ended questions. Or open-ended. Describe your family's traditions. But have a variety. You do not want all closed-ended questions. You're not going to be able to gather a lot of information that way. And audio record your interview with the parent, because you're going to have to upload it for me to listen to. Do avoid Sensitive words, bad, immature. Do you think your child is delayed or disabled? What a weird thing to do. Is he on the spectrum? Do be clear about what you're asking. Don't use professional jargon. The parent does not need to know. You can tell them about the developmental domains, but you could use area. What area do you think you would like for me to start with? His motor skills, right? Be careful not to ask leading questions, such as, don't you agree that children should engage in play daily? Because we're looking for a yes answer. Don't ask loaded questions. Is the child acting out directly caused by the marital strife in your household? I think we know better than that, but I didn't want to omit mentioning it. And then practice. So you do not need to do this right now because we're not ready for the parent interview, but I'm going to be asking you to write some examples, and those examples can be found on 74 and 75, and you're going to submit your questionnaire to me before you interview the parent, okay? So again, to wrap up, have a binder. It says file folder. It should say, well, it says you have to have a binder. Get your consent form signed, communicate with the family, and make sure that you are previewing these chapters based on our reading schedule. Yay! Whew. This was a lot longer than I'd planned, but it's shorter than our class time. All right, ladies, gentlemen, friends, peace out. I guess I will see you Tuesday in class.